back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. Exercise was a major contributor in me losing 140 pounds almost 15 years ago. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing when I first started, simply heard that it's what I should be doing, so dove in. And I basically did it for the sole purpose of, quote, burning calories. Somehow in that 15 years, it turned from that into something that I love. It's hard for me to really imagine going more than 1 or 2 days without it and feeling settled. It's just almost like something I need. One of the major contributors that helped in that transition was when I began thinking less about it from a burning calorie standpoint and more about it from a training standpoint, and began using it for something. As I started discovering more, training more, and increasing volumes, I started to notice little problems would come up. Sometimes in the hip, sometimes in the knee, sometimes the feet, but all of them led to me having to change something or reduce the volume or stop altogether, whatever the exercise was that was causing the issue. What I learned in the years since is that there are reasons why that happens and ways to minimize or mitigate the risk of it happening altogether. I'm joined by Rob Minturn of Wilderness PT to talk more about that this week, and specifically about the joints and the muscles that take the most abuse, our feet. We cover a ton of topics that Rob gives some excellent tips on, resources he passes along, and other generally really good advice. So here's Rob and I covering feet first and how to train smarter to avoid getting sidelined. I will fail if I try to say anything else about you other than that. So I'm just I think a good place to start is just to let you kind of introduce yourself, who you are, talk about Wilderness PT. You can even dabble into how we met, whatever is good with you, but please kind of introduce yourself and tell folks who you are.
Right on. It's an honor to be on your podcast, man. I'm glad you reached out. Super stoked to be here. I think, I guess I've been a PT for 7 years now. I graduated in 17 and picked up travel PT ever since. And I think that's been a blessing because I've been able to work coast to coast and get a lot of different experience working with a bunch of different individuals and people's different mindsets as far as therapy goes and what they want out of therapy. So I've been able to take that and implement that, I think, in the Wilderness PT. I'm a strength and conditioning specialist as well. So I went to school in Wisconsin, and you can still hear the accent a little bit, I think, but traveling around, I've lost it some. But yeah, started Wilderness PT in 2021. I ended up moving 5 times in a calendar year that year. So I really didn't get a chance to do a whole lot with it. And then 2022, when I was in Wyoming, that's when I really started to go to events and start to work on it. I've learned a lot since then. And actually, spring of 2022 was when I reached out to you. I saw, it was a post. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was a post in, I think it was backcountry or backpack hunting only or something like that on Facebook. I don't know. Someone tagged you in a post. And so I looked you up. I looked up Valley to Peak, and I just kept an eye on you for about a month. And I finally reached out and just asked for advice and how things were going. And I think at that time you had recently gone full time with it, or had been full time with, like, within the last year or so. I forget what you had said. But I think we kind of stayed in touch after that. Does this ring a bell at all, or is this only like my memory?
You could have told me to give a description of how we met when we started this, and I would have said online. I don't remember. I wouldn't have remembered those specifics, but now I do. And in fact, like, what I remember most was, like, we initially this is actually a great introduction to, like, what we're going to talk about today. What I remember most about us first meeting was you were really interested more in the business side of things. And I remember you reaching out online, and I felt like, man, this would just be so much easier to talk about, because I don't think really anybody knows this about me except for maybe close friends, but I really enjoy and love talking about business as much as I do, well, maybe not as much as nutrition, but pretty close. I just enjoy that topic and find it fascinating. So I wanted to talk to you just maybe out of selfish motives because I like the topic. Long story short, I was on my way home from a goose hunt, and a wild weather kind of issue, or a wild weather event rolled into the valley while I was on the phone with you driving down the highway. And it just got really dark, really ominous, started hailing. And if I remember it, I couldn't even hear you. So I ended up having to call you back when I was almost home. And then we talked about Wilderness PT, and we talked about business. But that's a great memory of
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah. I remember not being able to hear you, and I like felt dumb because um I hate having to ask people to repeat themselves. And I remember I kept asking, what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that? It's like, this guy's gonna be so annoyed with me. But then, yeah, we talked later. But yeah, that was 2 years ago already. That was almost 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
So we've referenced Wilderness PT a couple of times. What is it? Like, if you could elevator pitch, elevator speech, someone stopped you in the supermarket, they saw a shirt that said that, and you had, 30 seconds to say, "Oh, well, Wilderness PT is this." What would you describe it as?
It is a coaching business. I help folks get ready for the mountains, and working with a PT and a strength coach. One, I think you get the best of both worlds. You get to work with someone that's going to keep you healthy, not injure you, but also improve your performance. And I also do women's health, pelvic floor coaching as well. That's been a side hitch for Wilderness PT with a continuing education course that kind of spurred that, and some success, early success that I had with that, with helping some women out with that. So that's kind of spurred a little side portion of Wilderness PT.
So there's a lot of things that I want to cover with you today specifically. I think as a big overarching theme, what's important to look at is the daily little things that we can do to stay healthy, as far as, going into the mountains or whatever. And one thing that happens so often is it's really tough to see any progress if you're constantly having to take time off, right? Because you've got something wrong in your shoulder, something wrong in your back, something wrong in your knee, something wrong in your foot, etc. I'd be curious, as we kind of lead into more specific topics whenever it comes to physical therapy and just generally trying to stay healthy and prevent injuries so that we can train, so that we can go do stuff that we love to do. What are, in your opinion, are the three greatest mistakes that we make in training that lead to some of these constant issues popping up or recurring, that keep us out of being able to do what it is that we love?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think number one is too much too soon, having too high expectations. You're motivated right away. You hit the ground sprinting. And so that leads to doing too much too soon, whether it's hiking, jogging, in the weight room, whatever you're doing. I think that's the low hanging fruit as far as that goes. A second, I think not progressing your exercises or your rep and set scheme, not adding variety there, like doing the same old, same old. If you're doing the same reps, same sets, same weight for more than 4 to 6 weeks, that's got to change. So those are the two, I would say those are the top two things, not adding variety to workout stimulus and then doing too much too soon.
Do you have, or what would the general suggestion be to prevent adding something too much too soon? Because like what often happens, or at least what I see in people, is they'll have limited time frames, right? And the thinking is, the harder I go, the faster I go, the more aggressive I go, the more I do, the better the outcome. But like, from what it sounds like you're saying, that's not the case, and that there is, maybe, like, call it a model that we could follow to really be preventative from that happening. What's that look like? What would you suggest?
So we'll go with the weight room to start with. I think if someone's brand new to exercise, their first rep scheme should be more the muscular endurance. The reason being is it's going to be hard because you're doing reps of 15 to 20, maybe 30, right? And you're going to be under tension for a long time, but it's not a huge burden. It's not a huge overload on the nervous system and on the tissues themselves. So that's a good place to start if someone's brand new, or if you're getting into, like, you've taken a hiatus for 3+ months. That is a good place to start, is doing a 4-week block in the muscular endurance realm, because the weights are going to be lighter as well with that. Like, you can't push your 1 rep max 15 times. If you're doing that, then your 1 rep max is much higher than what you're saying your 1 rep max is. And then after that, slowly progressing into more of the hypertrophy range or the power strength range. Hypertrophy being 8 to 12 reps, or 6 to 12 reps, and then strength being 1 to 6, 1 to 5. And then from there, you kind of just cycle through. Like, you can go endurance, hypertrophy, strength, endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and that you're going to have enough variety in the weights that you're choosing, that's not going to really dispose you to an injury. And that's, you need, like for hunters, for example, or mountain athletes, you need to have muscular endurance, but you also need to be powerful and bigger muscles. Like, people are like, well, I don't want to get big for the mountains. Like, I don't want to have to haul that muscle up the mountain. You're not going to get monstrous doing a 4 or 6 week block of hypertrophy. You're just not going to be in that phase long enough to really build substantial muscle mass. But what that is going to do, it's going to allow, or it's going to increase the muscle fiber size microscopically, and those muscle fibers can then handle more work for when you go on your jogs or when you go on your longer hikes. Those muscles can handle more stress that are applied to them.
From what you're saying, the best way to prevent going too hard too fast is you want to slowly introduce the muscle into more challenging weights. Not only are you slowly introducing the muscle into more and more and bigger challenges, but you're varying how you do that. And the way that you're varying it is by adding or removing weight and then adjusting how many times you're lifting that weight based on the weight. So for example, lighter weights can be lifted more times. You're calling that muscular endurance. Higher weights can be lifted fewer times, and you're calling that hypertrophy, or what'd you say the other one was? Or you're calling it strength. Is that kind of the main concept of not coming out too hard too soon?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. You're a heck of a podcast host.
So the second question that I guess comes to my mind then would be, it sounds like the thing that everybody needs in order for this to happen is time. You can't come 6 weeks, 8 weeks before an ultra or before a hunt or before a big hike or whatever and think, all right, let's do this. I'm just going to start knocking these things out. Discipline equals freedom. I'm the hardest dude on the planet. Watch me knock these out. And maybe that's true, but you're saying there's a better way if we start earlier from a time standpoint. Here's my question. How early would you recommend starting? How many weeks out from said event would you suggest people start thinking about slowly introducing different weights and different rep schemes to prevent overuse injury?
I would say 16, just because that allows you to get through each one of those cycles at least once. And then that cycle leading up to your event is going to, you can kind of pick and choose, like depending on what hunt it's going to be or what your event is, then you can pick what set and rep scheme you want to be in leading up to that. But first, if you're brand new again to exercise, or if you're just picking it back up, the first 6 to 8 weeks are mostly neural adaptations. The nervous system, the brain, the nerves and the muscles are communicating better. That's really what the progress is. So people see a ton of progress typically within the first 6 to 8 weeks with pretty much no matter what they do in the weight room. After that, that's when you have to start getting a little more creative with your set and rep scheme, with your programming, but it doesn't have to be super, like, you don't have to make it super complicated. You pick 4 or 6 movements, or if you're limited on time, 3 to 5 movements, and you just do those movements and you do them well. And then every 4 to 6 weeks, you add variety as far as the movement stimulus goes. Like you add a rotation or some sort of backward motion to a forward motion. But with the 16 weeks, that's giving you enough time to get the nervous system to adapt, but also allowing enough time for the muscles to truly start adapting them too.
Okay, so we have to start early, potentially 16 weeks out. We have to add not only variety in terms of varying weights going from heavy to light, and then having the correlated rep scheme, if you want to call it that, based on the amount of weight that you're moving. But even variety in exercise is also important. So, like, I think one that most people would be familiar with would be you're not just laying on a flat bench and moving a barbell in a vertical fashion for bench press for all 16 weeks. Maybe that's what you do for 4, but then maybe it's cable crossover, or maybe it's dumbbell, or maybe it's incline, or maybe it's incline dumbbell. So there's different movements, and all of these are to prevent overuse. So you're not just having the same constant tension on the same constant muscle group to prevent injury.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right.
Okay, let's talk about me, because this is how you this is how you wound up getting stuck with me in a big way. So I was essentially training like this, right, for the most part, and I understood the concept of needing to start 16, and sometimes I would even do 20, 24 weeks out. I knew to take it, don't build more than 10% in any given week, whether that was with mileage or with weight or with weight in a pack or whatever. I knew that you needed to periodically take breaks away from a high training cycle, right? So you run a really difficult series for 3 or 4 weeks straight, and then you take a 5th week that may be slightly less to allow your body to adapt to those really challenging 5 weeks. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Was following it to a T. Got injured. Called you. You fixed me. One thing that I would really love to talk about, because I feel like this often gets overlooked. When people talk about injuries and we talk about the mountains and we talk about all of these things, what generally tends to come up is things like knees, hips, backs, and shoulders. And those are all true. That's not to negate those things if those are your issues. It's just to say, like, I feel like those get talked about quite a bit, and there's a lot of different, call them remedies or whatever, that have been out there. Not remedies, but different approaches to PT on how to fix those and how to draw your bow, blah, 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 blah. What we've not really ever talked about is ankles and feet, which to me is really ironic, given the fact that if you're doing any movement at all in the mountains, whether it's running an ultra, hiking, or anything, you could say that arguably gets subject to more beating than any other part on your body. I mean, you're drawing your bow maybe once on a hunt, as far as shoulders go. I suppose you could say your back is of concern if you happen to have success, or if you're just hiking in a long ways for several days at a time. But the one thing that gets overlooked a lot is feet and ankles. And so that was an issue that I had popped up, and kind of as a recurring theme was with my plantar fasciitis and, a few other things. So this is kind of a general question, and I'm sure as you start to describe it, like, some specific questions will come out of it. But talk about the feet and the ankles, and, like, what are some important things to think about there to keep those healthy so that we don't have to miss time?
So I agree. I think the foot is often not talked about enough. It's the only point of contact that should be coming into the ground on a daily basis, whether you're walking to and from work or hiking on the mountain. Like, it's the only portion of the body that should contact the ground. I think the biggest thing is definitely shoe choice and boot choice, but we'll go with shoes because people are typically wearing shoes more often than they are wearing their hunting boots. So we'll take bunion, for example, just because that's very common. And one of my hunting buddies, he actually has that, and his feet are kind of jacked up. But with shoe choice, we as a society, we've started to wear shoes, I think, too much, and people are having to wear shoes inside the house and all that. I don't think we're going barefoot enough. We have, I haven't counted up the muscles, and I heard someone say it was like 50 plus muscles, 56 muscles in the foot. When you're wearing shoes, you're not necessarily utilizing those muscles, like the small stabilizing muscles, just like the rotator cuff in the shoulder, just like the glutes, the small glute muscles in the hips. When you're wearing shoes, you don't necessarily address those small stabilizers. So I think going barefoot more often at home and whenever you can be outside, walking on the ground barefoot, not for like that earthing effect. I don't know much about that. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, but um, I think going barefoot is definitely beneficial to work those intrinsic muscles, and also going barefoot while you're resistance training. Again, the shoes are adding stability to your foot and to your ankle. When you take those shoes away, those muscles are going to have to stabilize. So that's another kind of two birds, one stone. We're looking to make small changes, but big differences. So going barefoot while you're resistance training, obviously not trying to take a toe off, dropping the weight on your toe, but I think that's a small change that people can make. I think that's
Covers it.
shoes.
All
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I don't know. How in depth do you want to go with it?
We can go as in depth as you want, because here I'm going to play devil's advocate. So here's here, like, I've heard that, right? I've heard, oh, we'll go barefoot, but I also know, like, so let me back up. So I've heard the go barefoot part. In the same time, the whole go barefoot community sort of rose up, if you want to call it that. There also then came the crowd that was really into a zero drop shoe, right? Which is basically, like, I don't think anybody has ever done a great job describing this. So for anyone who's not familiar with what a zero drop is, there's most shoes that we are familiar with have a drop from the heel to the toe, right? So we're to some degree always walking on, let's call it an incline. Your heel, even if not perceptible, is always sitting slightly higher than your forefoot and your toe. So enter zero drop shoe, enter barefoot running, right? That doesn't happen when you walk around with no shoes on. You've got zero drop between your heel and your forefoot. They're basically hitting the same spot on the floor at the same time. Same with these zero drop shoes. For people who, I don't know if, let's say, acclimate themselves to that, or let me change that. For people who have a natural shape in their foot and or ankle flexibility, those can be great. But are there times when someone has a physiological issue where those aren't good choices for them? Like, and I know, for example, let me give you a couple of examples, and you can say, yeah, that would categorize as people you're describing, or no. My argument would be that what these people missed was this. I know several folks, myself included, who have used zero drop shoes, who have tried barefoot running, and actually caused foot issues, specifically with the arch. So is there times where, if someone's tried these, because maybe someone has heard this before and have found that didn't work for me and it actually caused an issue, could there be a situation or a scenario where there's a group of people, for whatever reason, that doesn't work for?
There might be. I don't know anything in the research as far as like, hey, if these folks have this clinical condition, like they're not a candidate to wear zero drop shoes, or they shouldn't go barefoot. They should always wear shoes. You're born, or we are born with our bony structure the way that it is, right? Think about how long it takes for our teeth to change when we wear braces. Like, well, people are wearing braces for years. So your bony structure is kind of your bony structure, whether you have a low arch or a high arch. What happens is, and this is pretty much all musculoskeletal injuries, is that it's a load intolerance, right? So if someone goes from wearing Asics or Brooks all the time in the house, at home, at work, they're always wearing shoes, to these zero drop shoes, are going barefoot, it's going to be a huge shift in where the load is taking place. It's going to be more of like a midfoot and a forefoot load versus a heel strike. So their forefoot and the arch, and it's not used to it. So yeah, it's going to, if you go from one extreme to the other, it's not going to go well. So having that gradient, kind of like how we referenced working into resistance training, you start with endurance and you move to hypertrophy or strength, and you just shift things around just to vary the load. Same thing with your feet. If you're wanting to do this, you can do it unless unless your podiatrist has said that it's not a good idea, but you can do this. It's just going to be how quickly can you shift over. It's going to change where you're feeling the stressors. And so you have to give your body enough time. Like, I'm not talking days, I'm talking weeks. You have to give your body enough time to transition into that, for your body to adjust and for the tissues to adapt. And then you can start to wear that stuff more often. It might only be 10 minutes. Like, you maybe only able to go barefoot for 10 minutes. I'm working with someone right now. She's a family friend at home. Has to wear shoes in the house all the time. So going barefoot for her, it might be 5 or 10 minutes before things flare up, but starting to transition out of that. So that way she's not having to wear shoes all the time.
Tell me if I'm trying to dig up stuff that doesn't exist here. Based on what you're saying, then could we say or suggest that using an orthotic is a crutch, since it essentially provides an artificial support to the foot for someone having issues? It seems like if you put, what amounts to a cast under your foot, the body never has the opportunity then to adapt to something like that, to where it could improve foot and ankle mobility. And essentially, the hope would be to alleviate the situation.
Right. Orthotics have their place. I don't think custom orthotics are worth the money. And that's research based as well. Like, there's, to my knowledge, with the research, there's no significant difference between custom orthotics and over-the-counter orthotics. So spending the money on custom orthotics when you can get the same results with over-the-counter, that's usually the route that I suggest. With the orthotic, it's kind of like using a shoe with good support in it. You can transition out of it. Like, I had to use orthotics last year in my hunting boots. I was having some pain on the inside of my foot down by my big toe with the increase in volume and training. And so I just put some orthotics in my boots. The boot company that I wear, the insoles that come in them are not great anyway. So those were getting worn out, and they were a couple years old. So I just went ahead and purchased normal or regular orthotics over the counter at REI. And I've just been running those just because I haven't found like a normal insole that I could put in there. But I feel confident in the fact that if I took that orthotic out, I would be fine. But using orthotics is not bad if you're having foot issues. If it helps alleviate the foot issue to allow you to hike a little bit further, so be it. But then you can start to transition out of that as the foot gets adapted to hiking that further distance. You'll just have to kind of play cat and mouse with that.
Without throwing your boot company under the bus, which I guess you can if you want, but what would be an example of an over-the-counter orthotic you'd recommend people buy?
Oh man, any like REI. I'll look up the brand.
So I know a couple that that are popular that come to mind are on the less expensive end of the spectrum. Would be like Superfeet. Like I know a lot of guys that like the Adapt Hike Max or whatever it is. It's like a fairly cushiony type of insole, right? So I know a lot of people like that. I've not personally used that, but that's one that comes to mind if you know anything or would recommend or not recommend that. And the second that tends to veer more on the custom side would be Sheep Feet, which are, if I remember the costs right, probably 4 times the price of those Superfeet Adapt Hike Max. Any other suggestions outside of those two? Any reason you would sway someone towards one and maybe not the other?
So Superfeet is what I was thinking. That's what I went with. I would like find one that works well for you. If you go to a running shoe or running store, a shoe store, they're going to have a few more options, but get an orthotic that feels comfortable for you. If you want to spend the money on a custom orthotic with the Sheep Feet, by all means, go for it. The research does not support the fact that custom orthotics are superior to over-the-counter orthotics. So I would steer people spend the money on other gear and get over-the-counter.
So it's not saying that products like custom orthotics are bad. It's just saying that there's no real advantage. It's like supplements, right? We always say like I'm I'm not saying that supplements are bad necessarily. I'm just saying that it's not going to be the game changer because you went the supplement route. That's
Right.
what you're essentially saying for custom orthotics. Okay.
Yeah. And I've never used sheep feet. I've never had to. And everybody that I've talked to have said that they're super comfortable. And that may be the case. Like the material that they use to make the orthotic, it might be super comfortable. And it's hard to say, hey, you would have gotten the same thing with an over the counter orthotic. Like, I'm not here to tell you that, similar to you with supplements. Like, I'm not here to tell you that that supplement, you think it's working for you, go ahead and take it, like, because you think it's working. I'm not going to tell you to steer differently if it's working for you.
I have not used super feet. I have used sheep feet, and they're like walking on a cloud. So, but that's only like for all I know, super feet could be the exact same. And in full transparency, I got the sheep feet for free to write a review on in a pair of boots that we were also writing reviews on. So, that's the reason that I had those, and I've not tried anything else. But I will say, without any other prior experience with some of these other ones, they were really comfortable and definitely levels above the factory insole, which was from, let's see, I've had them both in a Zammerlan, however you say that, and in Schnee's, and they were great in both. All right,
Yeah.
back to me and my issues that you've limped me through over the years. What was most interesting to me, and I have a feeling you're going to be able to speak to this, is when we started working on trying to fix the issues with my feet, I didn't do anything at all with my feet. Like, there was one exercise that you sort of had me introduce from a therapy standpoint that had to do with my actual feet. Everything else had to do with really my knees and up. So my questions would be this: why? And then 2, what did you have me do? Because I feel like, people would, even if people don't struggle with issues for their ankles and feet, what you gave me feels like it could be a great mobility preemptive thing so you don't run into issues with your feet. So going back to the questions, why didn't we touch my feet, and what did we do?
We didn't touch your feet because I asked you if you had some low back issues going on. And so you said yes. So that made me think, let's check out low back stuff, see if we can't get your hips stronger. I will say that you and I did not do a video chat at all. Like, the way that you and I have done things has been a little different than the way that I typically do things with clients. I like to see people move, and getting your schedule and my schedule on the same page to where we could get on a video call and have you do some of that stuff was very difficult.
Let me just intervene here and say that you worked very hard to get me to do that. I never created the time, largely because I didn't have it, but that was on me, not on you. So just for like full disclosure, so everyone knows that this wasn't a you thing, this was 100% on me. Go ahead.
So you had some low back stuff going on and started treating you for that. Had you do, I'm trying to think of the one foot thing that I had. Are you talking about the one where you were on a stair, you stood up, switched to one leg, slowly lowered yourself down? That one?
Yeah, the calf eccentrics.
Yeah. Yep. So to answer your first question, we didn't touch your feet because you had some low back issues going on. So that made me think further up the chain. What I had you do was a lot of glute strengthening and a lot of, I want to say, core work. I don't know. We're digging back to a year and a half, last spring. So core work and glute work was mostly what I had you do, along with those calf eccentrics, and modifying your training routine a little bit, your weight room routine a little bit, because you had the aerobic routine down from what I remember, right?
Yep.
So I had you do, it's a little program that I developed, for folks with low back, hip, and knee issues. It's the Gluty Tubie. So, it's a banded workout, and people laugh at me. They're like, they look at me because I can tell. I mean, it's not my first rodeo with people looking at me like, oh, another therapist giving me some abandoned work. Okay, whatever. And like, just try it. Put her on your feet. Tie it the way you're supposed to tie it. Put your feet together and tie it so that way there's tension in the band right away. And then go through the workout and tell me what you think. And then the text that I get, like it's hilarious to get some of these texts like, oh, dude, I didn't like my ass is on fire. And it's like, yeah, that's how it should be. And so that's that. The hips have a lot to do with the knee position, especially, or sorry, the foot position, especially in females. Um, Females with the pelvis, their pelvis shape is a little bit wider than men. So what that does is it creates an increase. It's called the Q angle at the knee. So it's basically more knock kneed. And so what that'll do at the foot, it creates a little more pronation at the foot, or a little more, a little more arch drop at the foot. And that can predispose the Achilles complex and the calf complex to overuse, because the Achilles and the calf supinate the foot. So they slow, or they control that eccentric portion, the lowering of the arch. They help control that. So that's how that's how some issues with the foot can be influenced by the hip. So that's why I started having to do some hip stuff.
So you're saying that essentially by doing this collection of exercises that are predominantly focused on the hips and the rear end, you're strengthening the muscles in there so that as they start to get tired or worked during your training, you're not making these imperceptible compromises in form, which then injure the foot and or knee and or any lower extremity, because you've taken the time to develop them through this very humbling little small tube to strengthen them. So as you start to get fatigued, like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like one of the major issues that can come with injury is either one, we're weak in a certain area, so we start to try to what word am I looking for here? Starts with a C.
Compensate.
We start to compensate in other areas, and then it develops an injury. And or what, like kind of what you're describing here, if there's the deeper that we get into an exercise, whether that's like aerobic training and it's running, or if it's hiking or whatever, the more tired our muscles are going to get. The more tired our muscles are going to get, there's not going to be as much intentional movement. You start to get sloppy, in other words. And that sloppy movement creates angles and lines in our legs, right, that are not natural, which causes the knee to bow out in one way, or causes the foot to try to compensate, or causes whatever. And it's that unnatural movement because of these weak muscles that then drive us to get these repetitive overuse injuries. So by trying to fix that through these small movements, you tend to have less injury as a result.
Yes.
That's
a heck of a summary. Yeah, that's simple. I mean, everything, when you run, the load of running does not change. But if your technique, say it's 1,000 pounds of force, right? It's always going to be 1,000 pounds of force as long as you say the same weight. Your running technique dictates where that load shifts to, whether it's going to be the forefoot, the heel, the knee, the hip, right? So if your running technique, or if you're weak in the glute, your running technique is going to compensate for that, and then it's going to shift it more to the knee and the foot. When that happens, the glutes aren't doing their job. So now the foot and the knee are going to get aggravated because they're working overtime. It's just like working overtime for a job. You can't work overtime forever. Eventually, you're going to get aggravated and not want to work overtime. It's the same thing with our bodies. Our tissues are like bridges, like they're meant for a certain load. If you exceed that load at a certain point, whether it's lifting and twisting and you do something to your back for like one instance, or it's a repetitive overuse with aerobic activity, you exceed that load, you're going to run into some sort of symptom, whether it's pain, tingling, if it's a nerve issue, anything like that. So addressing those strength deficits in other parts of the body then allow the symptomatic area to then chill out and go back to doing its role. And I think that's what happened with you, is that we addressed some weaknesses up in your hips. It allowed your hips to handle more of the load, so that way your foot wasn't having to handle it, and then your foot was able to go back to doing its normal thing, with the hip and the glutes now doing their role.
Yeah, it helped a ton. I became a gigantic fan of Gluty Tubi very fast. So, couple of things as we start to wind down. One, we've talked a lot about Gluty Tubi, which is this, program that you've put together. If people want to find out about it, want to look into it, etc., how do they do that?
So it is available under the Spike Camp membership. It's a $24 a year membership. Under that, you get the Gluty Tubi that Cal was talking about. You get a workout, and you get the shoulder workout that's very similar to the Gluty Tubi, except for it's for your shoulders. That's where it's accessible at. There's a code in there that you can get access to the page. You watch the video. I do the demonstration. I do the voiceover. I do the cueing. I wrote up a little paragraph on each exercise if people are have to read in order to learn. So there's for every learner, there's something there for them, and that's where people can get access to it.
So I will link that in the show notes, so no one has to go digging for it. And I will say this too: when we first did that, you sent me a couple of AccuTubing bands in the mail. I broke those eventually because I did Gluty Tubi so much. And you can buy them online, but you can only buy them in big rolls. They're expensive. What I did find was there is on Amazon, I think it's like $10 for a pack of 5 of these nylon bands that you could use for this. So that's like what I've used now. And they range from really, 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 really ultra light and easy up to really, 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 really stiff and challenging. So you can progressively add, resistance to that band if you wanted to. And I think they're, like I said, they're cheap, but I will link those in the show notes too. So if you're interested in doing, you will want some sort of something like that to do if you want to do this. So if you have it already, great. If you know a PT who can get AccuBand, great. If you don't and you want to be able to order it on Amazon relatively cheap, you can check the show notes and I will link what I bought, and they've worked great so far. Final question: where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram, wilderness.physical.therapy. Website is wildernessphysicaltherapy.com. And then emails info@wildernesspt.com. I'm pretty original, like to keep everything the same. So
cool. Any last minute parting words of wisdom you want to give folks?
Add variety. Variety is a spice of life, whether it's in the kitchen or in the weight room or with your aerobic training. Take a recovery week every 4 to 6 weeks, change up your movements, change up your work or your load stimulus, and that should keep you healthy and keep you progressing and improve your performance for the mountains.
That's great. Thanks for coming, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
I want to say a big thanks to Rob for helping me personally, but also the information that he gave on here and the time that he committed to it as well. He mentioned a resource that he's got. I'll link that. If you guys want to check that out, you most certainly can. And of course, if you have any questions, you can send those over to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. If you're interested in any of the resources that we have, whether it's past podcast episodes, which you can search on our website, any topic that you may be interested in, see what we've talked about, any of the written guides that we've created, and any of the Foundations Plus courses that we've got, which is our group coaching option. You can check all of those out on the website at v2pnutrition.com. I will link those, so if you're interested, you can look at them. And yes, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here again in a couple of weeks with another new episode.